Hello, fellow teachers. Welcome to Selfie Lectures, Teacher Edition. Now, for those of you who don't know what Selfie Lectures is, it's a series I do with my students, and it's just a way to relate to them and get meaningful information to them. But I decided to do a Selfie Lectures Teacher Edition just to fill you in on some information that I've actually been studying. All right, and I just want to let you all know. So, we're going to be talking about some different teaching practices and learning practices. All right, some things that we can implement in our classrooms that will help our students learn more. All right, I know you all care about your students. I know you all want to do a good job at teaching, and if you don't, you won't be here for long. But for those of you who really want to learn something new or you want to reinforce some things that you may already know, I have some information for you. Let's get started. All right, so I'm going to talk about something as teachers know all too well, and that's testing. And that word is just makes you cringe. I know it does. I know our students feel the same way. But I'm going to talk about different methods of testing that you may not do in your classroom that can improve our students' learning. The Association of Psychological Science came out with a paper discussing different ways that students learn best, the most effective ways that they learn. And so it was ways that, or it was methods that us teachers could use to help them learn. Right? They had 10 different ways, but I'm just going to focus on one, and that's practice testing. Now, I want to talk about more than just one, but I'm short on time, unfortunately. So, practice testing was basically taking a test that was low or no stakes rather than the high stakes summative assessments that we usually give that makes our students cringe and makes us die of boredom, right? But these practice tests are actually ways that the students could recall information constantly, which will actually improve their performance on the high stakes exams that they take in the future. Also, Benedict Carey talks about the same thing, taking tests as another study session rather than just taking them as a way to measure our student performance. And while we're discussing Benedict Carey, he wrote a book called How We Learn: The Surprising Truth of When, Where, and Why It Happens. And in this book, he discussed pre-testing. And pre-testing is just another form of testing, of course, but it happens before you actually introduce the material. He actually did an experiment on himself where he had to learn the capitals of African nations. And he saw that when he pre-tested and got feedback, he actually performed better than when he sat down and studied the information for the same amount of time. And that shows you just how effective pre-testing could be. Rather than relying on our students to sit down and study something, if we offer them a pre-test and then we give them feedback and give them information about that topic as well, then they would actually recall the information in the future much better than if we were to just do it in a more traditional fashion. And that's one form of testing that we can actually incorporate. So, practice testing and pre testing are things that we should focus on doing in our classrooms. Okay, I know exactly what you're thinking. A very real concern with high school students. You're thinking, but Mr. Word, if I give them test and it's not for a grade, they're not going to try. Right? I understand. I have the same problem with my kids. Some of them will, some of them won't. So for those kids that won't, I have something else. We have to focus on how they really learn. What's the most effective way to have our students learn so that even if they don't take the pre-test or the practice test seriously, they can still do well? I have the answer for you. The main way to help our students learn is to fight against cramming. We're high school teachers. Our students cram for almost every exam, and we know it. So, in order to defeat cramming, which is shown to be not effective, in fact, there's a guy named Tom Stafford that writes an article on how our cramming or our idea of cramming is so mistaken. We think because we're so familiar with the topic, because we just read it, that we know it. Actually, Benedict Carey talks about the same thing. He calls it fluency. When we were really familiar with something, then we think we know it and we're fooling ourselves and we actually do worse on the test than we expected because we're like, what was that? It was right on what was the answer to that question? That's what happens when we cram. So the way to actually do it is a method called spacing out. Now, spacing out or the spacing effect or whatever you want to call it is actually taking information and having a set time period of when we reintroduce it to our students. That way, over time, they will retain more and more information so that when it comes time for the test, even if they decide to cram to be more familiar, they will recall it much better because we spaced it out in on researched intervals to give them the best outcome when they take their exams. And hey, if you're anything like me, I know the first thing that comes to your mind. We can give them a little more homework that's spaced out in the perfect intervals that'll help them learn. But there's an author named Saga Briggs that writes about the myths we have behind teaching, and homework is one of them. It says that homework doesn't really boost performance in the way we think, and in some cases, it actually reverses it. And so it says that the motivation and the drive of certain students is what helps them do well in the class, not the homework necessarily. So if you're going to space out, make sure you do it within the classroom. That way you can be assured that your students are actually spacing out in the proper intervals and that they'll have better performance in your classroom and in the future when they take these methods and they apply it to other classwork. Ooh, that was a mouthful. But that is your selfie lecture for the week. Teacher edition. Now, I know you all are very caring teachers here at Kempton High School, but I have one question to ask you. Are you being the most effective teacher? Hey, have a great week, guys.